Captain Marcus Wellington had served the Royal Guard for 15 years, and in all that time he had never questioned an order. His loyalty to the crown was absolute, his discretion legendary among his peers. But as he stood outside Queen Consort Elena's private study at 3 in the morning, watching shadows move behind the frosted glass doors, something felt terribly wrong. The palace corridors were supposed to be empty at this hour, save for the night security detail. Yet here was Queen Elena, working in secret when she should have been asleep. Marcus adjusted his position slightly, his military training keeping him alert despite the late hour. He wasn't supposed to be patrolling this wing tonight, but a last-minute schedule change had brought him here just as he noticed the unusual activity. Through the gap beneath the door, he could see multiple sets of feet moving around the room. Elena wasn't alone. The soft murmur of voices carried through the heavy wooden doors, but the words were indistinct. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Protocol dictated that he should announce his presence, but something held him back. In his years of service, he had developed an instinct for danger, and every fiber of his being was now screaming that something was amiss. The Queen Consort had always been different from the other royals, where they were open books, carefully managed by their handlers. Elena operated in shadows. She had come from a wealthy but politically connected family, and her marriage to King Alexander had been seen as a strategic alliance rather than a love match. Over the years, Marcus had noticed her growing influence over palace operations, often inserting herself into matters that traditionally fell outside the consort's purview. A door handle clicked, and Marcus quickly stepped back into an alcove, pressing himself against the cold stone wall. 2 figures emerged from the study, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. One he recognized immediately as Elena's private secretary, a sharp-faced woman named Victoria Ashworth who had started working at the palace shortly after Elena's arrival. The other was a man Marcus didn't recognize, tall and lean with graying hair and an expensive suit that marked him as someone from outside the palace staff. "The documents are ready," Victoria whispered to her companion as they walked past Marcus's hiding spot. "By morning, the transfer will be complete and there will be no way to trace it back to us." "And you're certain the king's signature is convincing?" the stranger asked in a low voice tinged with a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. "Victoria has been practicing for months," came Elena's voice as she joined them in the corridor, closing the study door behind her with barely a sound. "Even the king's own staff won't be able to tell the difference." The beauty of having access to so many of his personal documents is that we've had plenty of examples to work from. Marcus felt his blood run cold. They were discussing forgery, and not just any forgery, but forging the king's signature. As captain of the Royal Guard, he had sworn an oath to protect the crown from all threats, foreign and domestic. But what did you do when the threat came from within the royal family itself? "The Swiss accounts are ready to receive the funds," the stranger continued. "Once the paperwork is filed with the Crown Estate Office, the transaction will appear completely legitimate. £20 million transferred for infrastructure improvements to a company that exists only on paper." Elena nodded with satisfaction. "And by the time anyone realizes what's happened, the money will have been moved through so many shell companies that tracking it will be impossible. Alexander will never know that his signature authorized the transfer of crown funds to our private accounts. They were stealing from the crown estate, using forged documents bearing the king's signature." Marcus had stumbled upon a conspiracy that went to the very heart of the royal family. His mind raced as he tried to process the implications. How long had this been going on? How much money had already been stolen? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do about it? As the 3 conspirators moved down the corridor, their voices fading into the distance, Marcus remained hidden in the alcove, his hands shaking slightly. He was just a soldier, trained to follow orders and protect the royal family. He had never imagined he would face a situation where protecting the crown might mean exposing the queen consort herself. The grandfather clock at the end of the hallway chimed 3:30, its deep notes echoing through the empty corridors. Marcus knew he had to make a decision. His oath was to the crown, to the institution of the monarchy, not to any individual member of the royal family. But Elena was the king's wife, the mother of the heir to the throne. Exposing her would create a scandal that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom. He thought of King Alexander, a man he had served faithfully and come to respect over the years. The king was known for his integrity, his dedication to his duties, and his genuine care for his subjects. If Elena was forging his signature to steal crown funds, She was not only committing theft but also potentially destroying her husband's reputation. Any scandal that emerged would inevitably taint the king as well, regardless of his innocence. Marcus waited until he was certain the corridor was empty before emerging from his hiding place. He walked slowly back toward the guard station, his mind churning with possibilities. He could report what he had witnessed to his superior officers, but how far up the chain of command did Elena's influence reach? He could approach the king directly, but accusing the king's wife of forgery and theft without concrete proof would likely end his career and possibly land him in prison for treason. What he needed was evidence, real proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The documents Elena and her accomplices had been working on were likely still in her study, but accessing them would mean breaking into private royal quarters without authorization. It would be a career-ending move if he was caught, but it might be the only way to gather the evidence needed to stop this conspiracy. As he reached his post, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would return to Elena's study before dawn and attempt to document what he had witnessed. He owed it to the crown, to the king, and to the people of the kingdom to uncover the truth, regardless of the personal cost. The next few hours would determine whether he was a hero or a traitor, and Marcus Wellington prepared himself for the most dangerous mission of his military career. The pre-dawn hours provided Marcus with the perfect cover as he made his way back through the palace corridors. X's of military training had taught him how to move silently, and his knowledge of the palace's security patterns gave him confidence that he could reach Elena's study undetected. The night shift guards were focused on external threats, not internal ones, and the intricate layout of the palace offered numerous routes that avoided the main patrol paths. Marcus had spent the past hour carefully planning his approach. Elena's private study was located in the west wing of the palace, an area typically off-limits to anyone without specific authorization. However, as a senior member of the Royal Guard, Marcus had access to master keys for emergency situations. He justified his actions by telling himself this was indeed an emergency, perhaps the greatest threat to the monarchy he had ever encountered. The study door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, and Marcus slipped inside, closing it carefully behind him. The room was exactly as he had expected from glimpsing it through the frosted glass, elegant and sophisticated with dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But it was the large mahogany desk in the center of the room that drew his attention, its surface covered with scattered papers and documents. Using a small flashlight to avoid turning on the main lights, Marcus approached the desk cautiously. What he found there exceeded his worst fears. Spread across the polished surface were dozens of documents, all bearing what appeared to be King Alexander's signature. Financial authorizations, property transfers, investment approvals, each one representing significant sums of money being moved from crown accounts to private holdings. But it was the practice sheets that truly shocked him. Page after page of Elena's attempts to perfect the king's signature, starting with obvious forgeries and gradually improving until the final versions were virtually indistinguishable from the authentic signatures Marcus had seen on official documents. The dedication and time invested in this deception spoke to a long-term conspiracy that had been months or even years in the planning. Marcus began photographing the documents with a small digital camera he had retrieved from his personal quarters. Each click of the shutter felt like thunder in the quiet room, but he forced himself to be thorough. These photographs would be his only proof of what he had discovered, and he needed to ensure that every detail was captured clearly. Among the papers, he found correspondence between Elena and various financial institutions across Europe. Swiss banks, offshore investment firms, shell companies registered in tax havens, all part of an elaborate network designed to launder stolen crown funds. The amounts involved were staggering, totaling tens of millions of pounds that had been systematically stolen over an extended period. One particular document caught his attention: a letter from Elena to a private banking firm in the Cayman Islands discussing the establishment of trust funds for her children from her previous marriage. It appeared that Elena was not only stealing from the crown estate, but was also setting up financial security for family members who had no legitimate claim to royal funds. The betrayal was more personal and calculated than Marcus had initially realized. As he continued documenting the evidence, Marcus discovered a detailed timeline of planned thefts stretching months into the future. Elena and her accomplices had identified upcoming crown estate transactions worth hundreds of millions of pounds, all of which were targets for their elaborate scheme. They weren't planning to stop with what they had already stolen. This was an ongoing operation designed to systematically drain royal resources. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside froze Marcus in place. Someone was approaching the study, their steps measured and deliberate. Marcus quickly gathered the documents back into their original positions and looked for a place to hide. The room offered limited options, but a heavy curtain beside one of the tall windows provided some concealment. Elena's voice carried through the door as she spoke to someone accompanying her. "I need to retrieve one more document before we finalize tomorrow's transfers. Victoria, wait here and make sure we're not disturbed." The door handle turned, and Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows behind the curtain, hardly daring to breathe. Elena entered the study and moved directly to her desk, apparently looking for something specific among the papers Marcus had just finished photographing. "Where is the Pembroke estate authorization?" Elena muttered to herself, shuffling through the documents. "I specifically placed it right here before we left." Marcus realized that in his haste to photograph everything, he might have disturbed the careful arrangement of the papers more than he had intended. Elena was clearly becoming suspicious that someone had been in her study. His heart pounded as he listened to her growing frustration. "Victoria," Elena called sharply. Come in here immediately." The private secretary entered the study, her footsteps quick and nervous. "Is there a problem, Your Majesty?" "Someone has been through these documents," Elena stated with certainty. "The arrangement is completely different from how we left them. We have a security breach." Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead as he realized the gravity of his situation. If Elena discovered him hiding in her study with a camera full of incriminating evidence, it wouldn't just end his career, it could end his life. People who posed threats to conspiracies of this magnitude had a tendency to meet with unfortunate accidents. "Should I contact palace security?" Victoria asked, her voice filled with concern. "No," Elena replied firmly. "We handle this ourselves. Check the security logs for this wing tonight. I want to know everyone who had access to this area after we left, and review the guard assignments to see if there were any schedule changes." Marcus knew that his last-minute assignment to patrol this wing would show up in those logs. It would only be a matter of time before Elena connected his presence in the area with the disturbance of her documents. He had to get out of the palace immediately and find somewhere safe to review the evidence he had gathered. "Also," Elena continued, "implement the emergency protocol we discussed. Move up the timeline for all pending transfers. If someone is investigating our operations, we need to accelerate our plans before they can interfere." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but Marcus was already planning his escape route. He needed to wait for Elena and Victoria to leave the study, then make his way to the parking area where his personal vehicle was located. Once away from the palace, he could examine the photographs he had taken and determine the best course of action. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Elena and Victoria left the study, locking the door behind them. Marcus waited an additional 10 minutes before emerging from his hiding place, using that time to ensure that the room appeared exactly as it had when Elena discovered the disturbance. Slipping out of the study and making his way through the palace corridors required every skill Marcus had learned in his military career. The pre-dawn darkness was beginning to give way to the first hints of sunlight, which meant the palace staff would soon be beginning their morning routines. He had a narrow window of opportunity to escape before his absence from his assigned post was noticed. As he finally reached his car and drove away from the palace grounds, Marcus realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a loyal guard protecting the royal family. He had become the keeper of secrets that could bring down the monarchy itself. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders as he disappeared into the London traffic, carrying with him the evidence that would soon shake the kingdom to its very foundations. Marcus drove through the empty streets of London as dawn broke over the city, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. He needed somewhere safe to examine the photographs and plan his next move, somewhere Elena's network couldn't reach him. His small flat in South London felt too exposed, too easy to find. Instead, he drove to a 24-hour internet cafe in a part of the city where no one would think to look for a member of the Royal Guard. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour, occupied only by a few students and night shift workers grabbing coffee before heading home. Marcus chose a computer terminal in the back corner, away from the windows and security cameras, and began uploading the photographs from his camera. As each image appeared on the screen, The full scope of Elena's conspiracy became clearer and more disturbing. The forged signatures were absolutely perfect, refined through hundreds of hours of practice until they were indistinguishable from the king's authentic hand. But it wasn't just the technical skill that impressed Marcus. It was the systematic nature of the operation. Elena had identified every possible avenue for extracting money from the crown estate and had created elaborate justifications for each theft. Property sales that never actually occurred, with the proceeds diverted to offshore accounts. Charitable donations to organizations that existed only on paper, with the funds immediately transferred to private holdings. Infrastructure projects that were approved but never begun, allowing for the theft of budgeted construction funds. The creativity and scope of the fraud were breathtaking in their audacity. As Marcus studied the documents more carefully, he began to understand the timeline of Elena's activities. The forgeries had started small, just a few months after her marriage to King Alexander, with relatively minor amounts that were unlikely to be noticed by the Crown Estate's financial oversight. But as Elena grew more confident and refined her techniques, the thefts had become increasingly bold and substantial. One document in particular caught his attention, a memo from Elena to Victoria discussing their exit strategy. It appeared that they were planning to execute one final massive theft and then disappear from public life, claiming that Elena's health required a retreat from royal duties. The final theft would involve the sale of several historic crown properties, with the proceeds being diverted before anyone realized the sales had been unauthorized. Marcus realized that Elena wasn't just stealing money. She was planning to destroy the monarchy's financial foundation and disappear with enough wealth to live in luxury for the rest of her life. The properties targeted for the final theft included some of the Crown Estate's most valuable holdings, assets that had been in royal possession for centuries and formed the backbone of the monarchy's financial independence. His phone buzzed with a text message from his supervisor, wondering about his whereabouts for the morning briefing. Marcus quickly typed a response claiming he was feeling unwell and requesting sick leave for the day. He needed time to figure out how to proceed without alerting Elena's network to his discovery. The photographs revealed another disturbing aspect of the conspiracy. Elena wasn't working alone, and her network extended far beyond Victoria and the mysterious stranger Marcus had seen in the corridor. There were references to contacts within the Crown Estate office itself, people who were positioned to approve transactions and avoid triggering normal oversight procedures. The corruption went deeper into the royal administration than Marcus had imagined possible. Among the documents was a list of bank account numbers and passwords, apparently for accounts Elena had established using false identities. Marcus realized that with this information, it might be possible to trace exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had been hidden. But accessing those accounts would require technical skills he didn't possess and would likely constitute illegal activity in itself. As he pondered his options, Marcus became aware that someone had entered the cafe and was watching him from across the room. A woman in her 30s, professionally dressed despite the early hour, had taken a seat with a clear view of his workstation. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, but not before Marcus noticed the small earpiece she was wearing. His military training kicked in immediately. Elena had moved faster than he had anticipated to identify and track him. Somehow, they had connected his presence in the West Wing with the disturbance of her documents, and had managed to locate him, despite his precautions. Marcus saved the photographs to a secure cloud storage account and began planning his exit from the cafe. The woman was joined by a man in a dark suit, and both of them were now making a show of casual conversation while keeping Marcus under observation. He counted at least 3 possible exits from the cafe, but all of them would require passing close to his watchers. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. "Captain Wellington," came Elena's voice when he answered, her tone deceptively calm and pleasant. "I believe we need to have a conversation. You've stumbled upon some private matters that require discretion, and I think we can reach an understanding that benefits everyone involved." "I'm listening," Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral while his mind raced through possible responses. "Excellent. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous pension package in exchange for your immediate resignation from the Royal Guard and your agreement to relocate abroad. You would be financially comfortable for the rest of your life, and all you would need to do is forget anything you might have seen during your patrol last night." Marcus understood the implicit threat behind Elena's offer. accept her bribe and disappear quietly, or face the consequences of opposing someone with vast resources and connections throughout the royal establishment. But his oath to the crown wasn't something that could be bought, regardless of the price offered. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said carefully, "but I need some time to consider my options." "Of course," Elena replied, though her tone had cooled noticeably. "But please don't take too long. Situations like this have a tendency to become complicated very quickly, and I would hate for you to find yourself in an untenable position." The line went dead, and Marcus realized that his time for careful planning had run out. Elena was moving to neutralize him as a threat, and his survival now depended on getting the evidence he had gathered into the right hands before she could stop him. But who could he trust with information that implicated the queen consort in systematic theft from the crown estate? He thought of Inspector Sarah Chen, a detective with the Metropolitan Police's Financial Crimes Unit, who had been assigned to investigate irregularities in royal finances several months earlier. Her investigation had been quietly shut down after Elena complained about harassment, but Marcus remembered hearing that Inspector Chen had been frustrated by the premature end to her inquiry. As Marcus prepared to leave the cafe through a rear exit he had identified earlier, he made a decision that would determine the course of events for everyone involved. He would contact Inspector Chen and arrange to turn over the evidence he had gathered, trusting that her dedication to justice would overcome any political pressure to suppress the investigation. It was a gamble that could cost him everything, but it was the only way to fulfill his oath to protect the crown from all enemies, foreign and domestic. The woman and man who had been watching him stood up as Marcus moved toward the rear of the cafe. Their casual pretense abandoned now that their target was on the move. But Marcus had not survived 15 years in the Royal Guard without learning how to handle dangerous situations. The real game was just beginning, and he intended to make sure that justice would prevail regardless of the personal cost. Inspector Sarah Chen was reviewing case files in her cramped office at New Scotland Yard when her secure phone rang with a call from an unknown number. As the lead investigator for the Metropolitan Police's Financial Crimes Unit, she received numerous anonymous tips, but something about this caller's voice immediately grabbed her attention. The man identified himself as Captain Marcus Wellington of the Royal Guard and claimed to have evidence of systematic financial fraud within the royal household. "Inspector Chen," Marcus's voice was tense but controlled. "We met briefly during your investigation into Crown Estate irregularities last year. I have information that directly relates to your terminated inquiry, and I believe you'll want to see what I've discovered." Sarah remembered Marcus well. He had been one of the few palace staff members who had seemed genuinely concerned about the financial discrepancies she had been investigating before political pressure forced the closure of her case. The investigation had been the most frustrating professional experience of her career, watching obvious evidence of wrongdoing disappear behind layers of royal privilege and political interference. "What kind of evidence are you talking about, Captain?" Sarah asked, her detective instincts immediately engaged despite the early morning call. "Forged documents, unauthorized financial transfers, and conspiracy to defraud the Crown estate of tens of millions of pounds. I have photographic evidence of documents bearing forged royal signatures authorizing illegitimate transactions. But I need to meet with you immediately, as I believe my discovery has been detected and my safety may be compromised." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The irregularities she had identified during her terminated investigation had suggested exactly this kind of systematic fraud, but she had never been able to gather conclusive proof before her superiors shut down the case. If Marcus genuinely had the evidence she had been seeking, it could vindicate her professional reputation and potentially save the monarchy from devastating financial damage. "Where and when do you want to meet?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her coat and car keys. They arranged to meet at a small restaurant in Greenwich, away from central London and the areas where Marcus might be expected to travel. As Sarah drove through the morning traffic, she reviewed what she remembered about her previous investigation. The Crown Estate's financial records had shown numerous transactions that appeared legitimate on the surface, but didn't hold up under detailed scrutiny. Properties sold below market value to companies that couldn't be traced, charitable donations to organizations with no apparent activities, and infrastructure investments that never resulted in actual construction projects. At the time, Sarah had suspected that someone with high-level access to royal financial systems was systematically stealing from the Crown estate. But every time she got close to identifying the perpetrator, her investigation would be redirected, or resources would be withdrawn. The final blow had come when Queen Consort Elena personally complained to the Home Secretary about police harassment, effectively ending any possibility of continued investigation. The restaurant Marcus had chosen was perfect for a clandestine meeting, busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for private conversation. Sarah spotted him immediately when she entered, sitting in a corner booth with clear sightlines to all entrances. His military bearing was unmistakable, but she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his eyes constantly scanned the room for potential threats. "Inspector Chen." Marcus stood as she approached, shaking her hand formally before they both sat down. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you would still be interested in pursuing this matter after what happened to your investigation. Captain Wellington, if you have genuine evidence of financial fraud involving the royal household, I am absolutely interested," Sarah replied firmly. "My previous investigation was shut down before I could gather conclusive proof, but I never stopped believing that something significant was being covered up." Marcus removed a small tablet computer from his jacket and began showing Sarah the photographs he had taken in Elena's study. Her trained eye immediately recognized the significance of what she was seeing, the careful documentation of a sophisticated fraud scheme that exceeded anything she had imagined during her original investigation. "These forged signatures are absolutely professional quality," Sarah observed, studying the practice sheets that showed Elena's progression from obvious forgeries to perfect reproductions. "The person responsible has invested serious time and effort into perfecting this technique, and the scope of the fraud is staggering." As Marcus walked her through the evidence, Sarah realized that her terminated investigation had only scratched the surface of Elena's criminal activities. The Queen Consort had been conducting systematic theft on a scale that threatened the financial foundation of the monarchy itself, using her position and access to circumvent every safeguard designed to protect Crown assets. "The most disturbing aspect," Marcus explained, "is the timeline I discovered showing planned future thefts. This isn't a completed crime. It's an ongoing operation that's planning to escalate significantly." According to these documents, Elena is preparing for one final massive theft involving the sale of historic Crown properties, after which she plans to disappear from public life claiming health issues. Sarah studied the exit strategy memo Marcus had photographed, her detective mind immediately grasping the implications. If she succeeds in selling these properties and diverting the proceeds, the monarchy could lose hundreds of millions of pounds in some of its most historically significant assets. This goes far beyond simple theft. It's an attack on the institution itself. They spent the next hour reviewing every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered, with Sarah asking detailed questions about the timeline, the people involved, and the security procedures that had been circumvented. Her professional assessment was that they had more than enough evidence to justify a full criminal investigation, but the political challenges would be enormous. "The problem we face," Sarah explained, "is that my previous investigation was terminated due to political pressure, and attempting to investigate the Queen Consort again will trigger even more resistance from the royal establishment. We need to approach this strategically, with enough evidence and support to prevent another cover-up." Marcus nodded grimly. "Elena has already attempted to bribe me into silence and has people following me. She knows that her operation has been discovered, and she's moving to accelerate her timeline. According to the documents I photographed, she's planning to execute the final phase of her plan within the next few days." Sarah realized they were facing a race against time. Elena was apparently preparing to complete her theft and disappear before any investigation could stop her. But rushing forward without proper preparation could result in another terminated investigation and the destruction of evidence. "I need to brief my supervisor and request authorization for a formal investigation," Sarah said. "But given the political sensitivities involved, that could take time we don't have. Meanwhile, we need to prevent Elena from destroying the evidence you photographed and from completing her planned final theft." Marcus leaned forward intently. "What if we could get the king to authorize the investigation directly? If King Alexander himself requested police involvement, it would be impossible for anyone to claim the investigation was inappropriate harassment of the royal family." It was a brilliant suggestion, but Sarah immediately saw the complications. How do we approach the king with accusations against his wife without alerting Elena to our activities? And how do we ensure the king's safety if Elena realizes that he's been informed of her crimes? As they discussed possible strategies, both Marcus and Sarah realized they were entering extremely dangerous territory. They were not just investigating financial fraud, they were uncovering a conspiracy that could destroy the monarchy and potentially put their own lives at risk. But their oath to serve justice demanded that they see the investigation through to its conclusion, regardless of the personal consequences. The game had changed from gathering evidence to preventing a final devastating theft while ensuring their own survival. Time was running out, and Elena was proving to be a far more formidable and dangerous adversary than either of them had initially realized. The plan Sarah and Marcus developed was audacious in its simplicity but fraught with risk. They would request a private audience with King Alexander under the pretext of a routine security briefing, during which Marcus would present the evidence of Elena's crimes directly to the monarch. If successful, they would have royal authorization for a full investigation before Elena could complete her final theft. If unsuccessful, they would likely face treason charges and the destruction of everything they had worked to accomplish. Sarah used her connections within the Metropolitan Police to arrange for a backup team of trusted investigators to be ready to execute search warrants the moment they received royal authorization. Meanwhile, Marcus leveraged his position within the Royal Guard to schedule the security briefing without alerting Elena's network within the palace administration. Every detail had to be perfect, as they would only get one chance to present their case. The morning of the planned meeting, Marcus received intelligence that Elena had accelerated her timeline even further. Victoria had been seen entering the Crown Estate offices with a briefcase full of documents, apparently preparing to execute the property sales that would complete Elena's exit strategy. They were literally hours away from watching hundreds of millions of pounds disappear into untraceable offshore accounts. King Alexander received Marcus in his private study, a wood-paneled room filled with centuries of royal history. The king appeared tired and stressed, the weight of his responsibilities evident in his posture and expression. Marcus had always respected King Alexander's dedication to his duties, but seeing him in person reinforced the personal nature of the betrayal Elena was perpetrating. "Captain Wellington," the king began formally, "I understand you have some security concerns that require my immediate attention. Please proceed with your briefing." Marcus felt the weight of the moment as he began to present the evidence he and Sarah had carefully organized. He started with the photographs of Elena's forged signature practice sheets, watching as comprehension and then horror dawned on the king's face. The monarch's reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for, immediate understanding followed by righteous anger at the betrayal. "You're telling me that my wife has been systematically stealing from the Crown Estate using forged versions of my signature?" King Alexander's voice was controlled, but Marcus could hear the fury beneath the surface. "Yes, Your Majesty. And according to the timeline we discovered, she's planning to complete one final massive theft involving the sale of several historic crown properties. The documents suggest she intends to disappear from public life after diverting the proceeds to offshore accounts." King Alexander studied each photograph carefully, his legal training from his university years helping him understand the full implications of what Elena had accomplished. The betrayal was not just financial, it was deeply personal, a violation of the trust that formed the foundation of their marriage and his ability to fulfill his duties as monarch. "What do you need from me to stop this?" the king asked simply. Marcus felt a surge of relief and respect for the monarch's immediate focus on preventing further damage, rather than dwelling on the personal betrayal. "Inspector Chen of the Metropolitan Police requires your direct authorization to conduct a formal investigation and execute search warrants. With your permission, she's prepared to move immediately to secure evidence and prevent the planned property sales." "You have my complete authorization," King Alexander replied without hesitation. "I want every aspect of this conspiracy investigated thoroughly, regardless of who is implicated. The integrity of the Crown Estate and the monarchy itself is at stake." As Marcus prepared to contact Sarah with the royal authorization, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. The distinctive pattern indicated a security emergency in the residential quarters, and Marcus immediately understood what was happening. Elena had realized that her conspiracy had been exposed and was making her escape attempt. "Your Majesty, I believe the Queen Consort is attempting to flee the palace," Marcus reported, his military training taking over as he assessed the tactical situation. With your permission, I'll coordinate with palace security to prevent her departure while Inspector Chen's team executes the search warrants. King Alexander nodded grimly. Do whatever is necessary to prevent her escape and preserve the evidence of her crimes. I'll deal with the political consequences later. Marcus immediately contacted Sarah, who had been waiting nearby with her investigation team. Within minutes, police vehicles were surrounding the palace while officers executed search warrants on Elena's study, Victoria's office, and several other locations identified in the conspiracy documents. The speed and coordination of the response reflected months of careful planning condensed into a few hours of intensive action. Elena was apprehended attempting to leave the palace through a service entrance, carrying a suitcase full of cash and false identification documents. Victoria was arrested at the Crown Estate offices as she tried to complete the unauthorized property sales, the forged documents still on her desk when police arrived. The mysterious accomplice Marcus had seen in the corridor was identified as a money laundering specialist with connections to several offshore banking networks. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Elena's conspiracy became clear through detailed forensic investigation. Over a period of 3 years, she had stolen nearly £60 million from the Crown Estate, using increasingly sophisticated methods to cover her tracks. The money had been hidden in a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that would have been virtually impossible to trace without the evidence Marcus had gathered. The scandal rocked the monarchy to its foundations, but King Alexander's immediate cooperation with the investigation and his decisive action to prevent further theft actually strengthened public confidence in the institution. His willingness to hold his own wife accountable for her crimes demonstrated that no one was above the law, not even members of the royal family. Elena was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud, forgery, and theft. Victoria received 12 years for her role in the conspiracy, while their accomplices faced varying sentences based on their level of involvement. The stolen money was recovered and returned to the Crown Estate, though the legal proceedings took several years to complete. Marcus was quietly transferred to a new position within the Royal Protection Command, his heroic actions officially unacknowledged to avoid further publicity, but privately recognized by grateful senior officials. Sarah was promoted to chief inspector and given resources to establish a permanent financial crimes unit focused on protecting public institutions from internal fraud. The Crown's secret had been exposed, justice had been served, and the monarchy had survived its greatest internal threat in modern history. But the scars of Elena's betrayal would remain, a reminder that even the most trusted individuals could fall prey to greed and corruption, and that eternal vigilance was the price of preserving the integrity of democratic institutions. In his final report on the matter, King Alexander wrote, "The crown is not diminished by acknowledging wrongdoing within our ranks, but rather strengthened by our commitment to justice and accountability. Let this serve as a reminder that our greatest duty is to the people we serve, not to protecting those who would betray that sacred trust." The end. This concludes The Crown's Secret, a work of fiction exploring themes of loyalty, corruption, and justice within the context of a fictional royal family. All characters and events are products of imagination and do not represent real people or situations.